Okay, so what we'll do is like last time, we'll record the formal presentation, and then once we're done, we'll stop recording so we can spill the tea in a safe space and not have that out in the world to see. So, should we get started, Kirsten?
Sure, let's do it.
Okay. Hi everyone. Welcome, welcome. Nice to meet y'all for the new faces. Taeyang, are you there? Do you want to introduce yourself? If not, no pressure. I know.
Uh, I can do it, but now it's being recorded. I'm here. Good to meet you all. But I'm not, my outfit is not for like formal recording. It's my,
Oh, good. That's the
Yeah.
advantage of Zoom.
Yes, exactly.
today this weekend is like festival in the small town, so I was not ready for. Oh, but I have to join, so that's why I'm here. But nice to meet you all.
Got it. Excellent. Glad you're getting outside too. That's great. Okay. All right. So, yeah, thanks for joining and spending your time with us on this Friday morning, afternoon, depending on where you are. So, today's session is about managing your research lab. We have many thoughts about what we found to be helpful in managing a lab and hope to share that with you today. And then, yeah, there'll be time at the end for questions if you have any, and we can have open discussion. So this is us. I'm Jess. We have slides to introduce ourselves, but I just want to note that Karsten and I have been friends for a very, very long time, as indicated by this photo. When was this photo taken? Do you remember?
I know it was when I was up visiting you in Seattle, so that must have been shortly
Yeah,
after you moved there. So I don't know.
2019, I
We
think.
haven't we
Yeah,
haven't aged we haven't aged at all since then,
that's
clearly.
right. Still fresh after all these years. Okay, yeah, let's get going. Here's our agenda. So we'll do introductions for the two of us, and then these are the themes that we came up with and kind of brainstorming about what it means to manage a research lab. So I think there's a even split between the people management, like the kind of HR side of things and like how you build a cohesive group. And then another significant portion is, of course, like lab infrastructure, which is equally important. And then we'll end with some challenges slash opportunities, ways to turn that challenge into a win, hopefully, and then end with some open Q&A. Okay, I think my intro slide is up first. Okay, so this is me, Jess Ray, she, her pronouns. I am from Florissant, Missouri, which is like in North County of St. Louis, Missouri. And I was at WashU in St. Louis for a very long time. I was there for my BS degree in chemical engineering and then basically stayed to do my master's and PhD in the department merged into energy, environmental, and chemical engineering when I was there. So my degree confuses a lot of people. um, During my PhD and then postdoc, a lot of my work was spent on water treatment technology development. So it started with synthesizing nanoparticles in the lab for water treatment applications. And then as I moved to like Berkeley and then now at University of Washington, I'm kind of scaling up those approaches to design materials to remove or degrade contaminants of concern. So I do a mix of like material science and then also environmental chemistry. Um, did a postdoc at UC Berkeley. That's where I met Carson. That was from 2015 to 2018, doing stormwater runoff management and treatment, and then joined UW in January of 2019. So I had a full year of normal before COVID, which was good and bad, I think, depending on the day when I think about it. I was also recently promoted to associate professors. This fall, I'll be associate, which is very, very exciting. And more kind of non-academic things. Thanks, y'all. I have a twin sister. That's her in the upper left. I have a dog, Lucy. She's 14, still very sassy. I also love to bake. So here's a wedding cake that I made. Oh, that was a visit with a photo, Carson. I think that's why you were there for Rachel's wedding.
Mm,
So I
mm.
made this wedding cake. I like to bake a lot and try new recipes. So that's me. Um, that's the Carson.
Okay. Yeah, so that's me. So I'm an associate professor. I actually got tenure a bit more than a year ago, January 2025, which was very exciting. Originally, I'm from Germany. That's where my accent is coming from a small town called Wertheim, which is about an hour away from Frankfurt, in case you've ever been there, probably at the airport. I actually did my undergrad and also my master's in geoecology, which I guess translate probably mostly to environmental sciences at the University of Bayreuth, which is in Germany. I did my PhD also in Germany. Actually, kind of a bit of an atypical one because I did it at a research institution, a Federal Institute of Hydrology. That was connected to a university, and I got my PhD in chemistry actually, and I was working on antiviral drugs in the aquatic environment, detecting them and their fate and so on. And then I actually did two postdocs, one with my PhD advisor in Germany for 3 years, and then I moved to UC Berkeley for 3 years to David Sedlak, where Jess and I met. And then during that time, I applied for a faculty position. So for me, it was always clear that I wanted to stay in the US, both for personal reasons, also, but for academic reasons. And I joined Hopkins in the Department of Environmental Health and Engineering in 2018. Um, Exciting for me. I'm actually in the middle of packing, or we are packing our things up to move to the West Coast for a year. I'm going to do a sabbatical at Stanford University. Literally, our flight is in 1.5 weeks, and packing it with two young kids that you can see on the top right. So these are the loves of my lives, and also take a lot of energy out. Actually, Jess is actually the godmother of my older son. So just to that's I guess shows you how close we are. And yeah, I love music. I love running, and being outdoors. And yeah, I guess on the pictures you see, I mean, I should see most of our work that we're doing, and I will be talking about this, is based on mass spectrometry, especially high-res mass spec, which is a very powerful tool, but also very expensive. And we will get into this a bit more. But yeah, that's from my side.
Hey, great. So I think, all right, okay, this is the next. So we'll talk now about the people side of managing a lab, and we'll talk about kind of how each of our labs are set up, and then some tips and suggestions that we have. So I think mine is first. Yeah. Okay. So currently I have 5 PhD students and 7 undergrad researchers. Um, I've had a postdoc in the past. I've had master students in the past, and but right now that's where we stand. And about I think 90% is probably 100% of my work is experimental. So I run a wet lab, and like I said, I do a mix of environmental chemistry, aquatic chemistry, and material science. So because of that, I don't own a mass spec. Like, and Carson has many mass specs. We don't own one. We use one at a cost center that's managed by a technician on campus, and then also all of the other instrumentation that we use for the materials characterization. So like the spectroscopy. Um, Actually, I do have two benchtop instruments that we use for materials characterization, but the giant guys like the electron microscopes and X-ray diffraction and scattering and all that, like we use again at cost centers on campus. So here's some tips for me for kind of running a research lab and managing your team members. Something I created only very recently, so it took a couple years for me to do this, was to create a sort of handbook for my research group. Um, I know some folks try to kind of start and do this right away, but for me, I think it was helpful to be in this position for a few years to kind of like feel it out, like understand the all the day-to-day like intricacies of managing people and kind of like what I was expecting from students. And I found myself, re-articulating the same thing to many different students when they came in the lab. And so I just thought to myself, I should just write this down somewhere and then have this as a resource that I can update over time and keep coming back to, especially as like university or your policies change over time. So I have to actually do this recently for another issue I'll talk about later. So I think it's a good resource to have at your disposal. And also, I think this will come up later too. If for whatever reason you have personnel that are not meeting expectations for a number of reasons, it's also really helpful to have some sort of documentation to say like, hey, this is, like these are our policies for the group, or explicitly stated in the handbook. And so I just want to remind you of these. And then that way you can kind of structure the conversation around something that's more concrete. Um, what's also helpful, especially if you have a large-ish group, is to determine tasks for everyone to do. So this can be for like the wet lab folks in the group, could be um, doing things like instrument calibration, management, that kind of those kinds of tasks. It could be, for example, like weekly eye wash checking or like keeping track of your ultra pure water system and maintenance. It could be like those types of activities that are common across all group members. And then something else that's also helpful, I think, is to have your research personnel be in charge of other non-lab related things. Like, for example, we try to do um, activities together outside of labs, like social gatherings and things like that. You can appoint a group member to kind of help manage those and like plan those so that you don't have to do all of that work in addition to your daytime job. So I found that to be a very helpful tool as well. So like delegation is absolutely your friend when it comes to managing a research lab because you only have so much time and can't do everything yourself. For me, this was really important early on. This is not just for research group members, but other faculty colleagues too, like to kind of set boundaries around expectation, or sorry, set boundaries around communication. So, like on the bottom, I think of both of Karsten and my emails that we send, it says something like, my working hours don't have to be your working hours. Like, please respond to this email whenever is convenient for you. I use Slack for my group to manage quick communications. So, like, hey, like there's an issue in the lab, can you stop by? Or, hey, quick question about like this purchase or this equipment that I'm looking at. Of course, email always works too. So I would say if you find yourself being over inundated by the amount of communication that you're getting, that you might want to think about setting boundaries for those. And that can be the form of communication, but also when, right, the communication occurs as well. Sometimes, a lot of us tend to work long hours during the weekday and then sometimes during the weekends, unfortunately. And sometimes, our group members can do so as well. And so sometimes it feels like I get messages that should not like be sent in the evening or be sent over the weekend. Like it's non-urgent and it can wait until the weekday. So again, like setting those boundaries, I think is always a good thing. And like I said, you can train faculty as well so they can stop expecting responses from you at certain hours of the day. So very helpful. Um, I found that it's nice to create opportunities within your research group for collaboration. So of course, like for PhD students in particular, like they of course should have their own like thesis that's distinct from others in the group. But I think it's nice to have group members identify common threads across everyone's research. So maybe one group member, for example, is trained on this particular equipment that someone else needs to use. If you find that, group member number two only needs to run like one or two tests with that instrument, it may not be the most cost effective or cost or time effective to have student B be trained on that instrument. You can just have the group member that's already trained kind of help out. That also could result in like a co-authorship for manuscripts that result from that work. Also creating opportunities to learn together. So these could be, I think it's one of the tests or items in our future slides, but like group meetings are really helpful. So they can do like journal club, read relevant articles to their research and learn from each other. Yeah, I think that's most of what I wanted to say there. Just, yeah, creating those opportunities. I think it also helps too, because um, sometimes, like in the past, I'm thinking about group members I've worked with in the lab. It can be really hard when someone feels like they're on their own little island and like everyone else is doing, a research topic that is very interconnected and like you're all over here doing your own thing. And so it's best to try to like mitigate that if you can at all. I think it just helps with morale too in the lab. Something that I've found is very helpful for me over the years, I'm probably too honest with my group members if you chat with them about kind of like how the sauce is made, so to speak. So for example, I have students contribute to like grant proposals that I'm writing. So I'll have them like write sections, and not just contribute to, of course, the science of what goes in the grant, but also I even show them like the budget, right? The other documents that get put together for grants, just so they can see it. Speaking of budgets, I think it's always a good idea to remind students like where their money's coming from, how it's allocated, and like how expensive things are, especially in the current time that we're living in. Like money is so precious. Research money is so precious, and so sometimes I think personnel have a great sense of how dollars are managed and like where to be cost effective, and others have no idea. They're just like, I'm here for a good time and I'm doing my research. And I think making that as clear as you can up front is, I think, only going to help and benefit you in the long run. I also even, there's some departmental policies that I think they're very clear on, but where there's confusion, I also talk with them about that, just so again, like they know about, probably again in too much detail, but the kind of inner workings of like how a unit's run in a department and how kind of the pieces fit together. So I think they feel empowered by that knowledge, despite the fact that it may be overwhelming. So I think that's it for me.
Okay. I'm just going to talk about, I mean, so obviously I agree with everything that Jess said. I have all the things also like that I'm doing. I guess one thing I don't have, and I should probably have, is this employee handbook that Jess has made. I think it's great because again, it's not only about the expectations that you have to the students, but you also can clearly outline that these are the expectations you can have for me. And I think that's also very important because again, you don't, just in terms of that, we're kind of like on a more or less equal level ground, which I always emphasize with my students. I personally don't see myself as necessarily the boss, more like as a collaborator. Obviously, I mean, I'm the one who makes ultimately the decision, but I like to do it more like on an eye to eye level. Anyway, so maybe just briefly. So I have currently 5 students. Plus 3 that just graduated. So I 3 PhD students over the last, I think, 8 weeks. Just before my sabbatical, I was like, all right, guys, time. I mean, they were all at the point. I mean, it's not like I kicked them out of the door. Don't get me wrong. They were all at a great place, and they all did extremely well. So, but I graduated 3 in the last 2 months, which is great. Um, I also have an assistant scientist in my lab, which is a research faculty. He actually started as a postdoc in my lab about 6 years ago, and he's at this point almost like he's my lab. I call him actually the boss. He's running my lab. He's incredibly like training people in the lab, and he's now research faculty, which means that he gets he's fully on soft money, so I have to bring in the funds for him. But again, he is extremely valuable. He writes papers. He works on grants with me. We are working together on a grant right now, for example, which has a lot of benefits. But again, certainly also makes substantially more than a postdoc. I also have a postdoc. Unfortunately, only until end of August. I'm actually in the need for a new one. And then I have 1 to 2 undergrad researchers typically in my lab, and we actually also have often one high school student through a local program, which allows high school students to be in the lab for 2 years, which is pretty good. And then, yeah, most of our lab is experimental. We do some computational chemistry work and some other modeling things, but yeah, it's really only or primarily aquatic chemistry and the analytical chemistry side. Yeah, I mean, in terms of like one thing I wanted to highlight and kind of as a um, as a note that for me has been extremely valuable is kind of diversify funding sources. So I unfortunately lost half of my lab's funding last year. I had 2 big EPA grants that within 2 weeks I got the note of termination that they don't meet the priorities of the new administration. So I lost that funding. 2 things: the university actually stepped up for the grad students, which is great. Our students have unionized, and so we guarantee them actually funding for 5 years, which has been really great. And the university, or especially the department, has actually stepped up to fund them. But I've also been working now a lot with utilities and other like private entities, and that has been, I would say, life-saving, because otherwise, literally, we would have to shut down my lab. We do a lot of like PFAS work, for example, right now, which I try to stay away from a long time because just from the reason that I know so many people, great people who work on PFAS, and I was like, I don't need to get my things in that too. But again, utilities and other entities have just so much need. So we do a lot of work on that side. And then we're also working with some foundations, which has been great. I don't know if universities often have a foundation office, so that might be also something to maybe reach out to and ask them so that they have a sense of the research you're doing, because they might have some conversations or hear about new funding opportunities through foundations or even private donors that might be of interest to you. And again, that might be very easy money if you get it, because you typically don't have to go through a whole proposal process. One other thing I wanna, and I mean this, I guess I'm more like an optimist and positive thinking person, but I think having tough conversations is part of what we do as faculty, and I think it's important to have these conversations. And that means like I've had conversations with some of my PhD students about like, okay, if you continue this way, I have doubts about your PhD. And obviously these conversations are hard to have, and I think it's also the most challenging part is probably to not take it personal, whatever is happening, because again, obviously you have a lot of, especially as assistant professors, there's a lot of, hey, like the students are very important. There's a lot of at play, right? So, but I think taking yourself out of that and just having these conversations, listening to them, and coming to a common ground has been it's been challenging, obviously, but it's also been very positive, because like that one specific student I'm thinking about, they've turned it around and have done an amazing job. But I've had to have these conversations. And again, it was just almost more like a misunderstanding of where we both are, my communications, their communications. So there's a lot of aspects. And so I wanted to highlight that. And then, I don't know, Jess, if you go to the next one. Oh, yeah. And I guess that's related both to the funding source aspect that I already mentioned. But I think it's also been very useful for me in terms of recruitment for postdocs and also PhD students, this networking aspect. I don't mean by this spend all of your days networking and go to meetings with different people, but I would say be comfortable spending a few hours a week, I would say. I mean, not every week, but to just go in conversations, have conversations, even if you're not totally sure where this is going. It's been really very helpful for me. I've gotten new ideas in terms of research directions. I've gotten new opportunities for collaborations and new funding mechanisms. So it's been really, especially right now with where things are with the funding environment, it's been super helpful. So I definitely would recommend doing that. Oh yeah, and this is kind of a bit of a surprising one to me, but please do yourself the favor, treat staff well. You can't work without them. Like, and I've gotten so much feedback from staff about how people are not saying thank you to them and whatnot. So even with my students, I always tell them, if you get an email, if you ask for an order, you get the confirmation, say thank you, please, because without them, we can't do our job. It's just not impossible. You have the grants people, you have people ordering potentially things for you. So without the staff, we can't do our job. And so treat them accordingly, right? So, and I like to treat everybody on kind of the same level. I don't think as a professor, I'm like better, whatever. Unfortunately, I think there is some historic, especially with older faculty, where that seems to be the case. But I think it's very toxic and problematic, especially from the perspective of that we rely on them. Okay,
Did you have one more? No, that's it. Okay.
I think that is.
Great. So, more on the lab side of things now, and how to maintain the infrastructure and the instrumentation. So we have some best practices here. We can like tag team this, Carson, a bit. So I think both of us do group meetings. This is something I did as a PhD student and I continue to do. And We don't have them over the summer because I think everybody needs a break. But over the academic year, we meet. And I think I mentioned Journal Club. That's been great. Every week, someone updates about their research. And so other group members get to learn about what other team members are doing in the lab because you think this happens organically because they're working next to each other, but sometimes it feels like it doesn't. And so I think it's always a good thing to have your team members understand like holistically what the research group is trying to accomplish for like the networking that Carson was mentioning. Like if they go out to conferences, they can kind of like advertise on behalf of you and your group, so that's always helpful. And before I stop talking here for a bit, something that my students have told me that they found really helpful about group meetings is that when it's time to go to conferences, they've already got a slide deck started because they've been presenting and updating on their research for group meetings. So I think they found it at the time maybe annoying to do to present at group meeting, but ultimately beneficial for them.
Okay, Jess, can I briefly jump in?
Yeah, yeah.
So one thing I want to mention that I often do with my, or I often do with all the students also when they come in, that they understand that the group meetings or the presentations that they give, I actually like them to be not necessarily polished. I really like them to give them the opportunity to talk about the challenges that they have. These are the problems I'm facing. And then that we can work collectively to think about solutions. And I think it's very important because it creates an environment where people are okay with, I don't know the answer. And we can all work on this together. So it's not like my students also do like, again, they prep. I had just said one of my students just had their graduate board oral exam. So last week she gave a practice talk about that, or if there's a conference. But again, I think just articulating that this is really not for like, you have to have a super polished presentation, but just to, okay, this is a challenge I have, please help me, I think has been great because again, then people just are also able to talk openly about things, which I think is very important in a research group.
One more thing I'll say here, and I'm happy to share this with anyone, but recently I led a group meeting about how to construct a manuscript. So it was journal club like in which we all read the same article, but instead of actually talking about specifics of the article, we talked about flow and structure and like here's how you build an introduction, like zoom out to zoom in, and like here's how you put together your experimental section and how you should structure your like figures and outline results and discussion. And so I think students have found that helpful too. So if you already have the structure of a regular occurring group meeting, I think you can do a lot of cool things with that.
Yeah, and I think maybe just, sorry, to add one more
No,
thing.
no.
What I've also done, and I've asked the students about this too, to give me feedback about what they want me to present. So I've given, for example, a presentation about, okay, how does the week of a professor look like?
Oof.
Like what does it a research grant entail? What are the documents? So in terms of just literally we went through like, okay, you have your proposal, but then you have your data management plan, you have your budget. I mean, I guess it's also related to what Jess said earlier about being transparent about funding. I actually had the experience where I at one point asked my students about like, where do you think your funding is coming from for your stipend? And they were all like, from the department. And I was like, what? So it was very helpful because once they realized that I'm basically responsible for their
Yeah.
salary, they really realized, like for example, if I'm asking you for preliminary data for a proposal, I just don't do this for fun. I'm thinking about how to fund you for 5 years. So
Preach.
yeah, I think so. I think again, this has been very helpful, and also that it's not only like that you also participate in these lab group meetings. So I mean, I guess just what you just said is a great example too. That it's not just like one-sided, but that you also participate.
Yes. Wow, that's great. The it's good to demystify, I think, is
Mm.
like a general theme of what we've been talking about so far. Um, let's see, yeah, having lab cleanups if you have a physical lab. So this would not apply for the computational folks, but maybe there's some alternative to lab cleanup that you could envision for your group. And then also maybe this is a group meeting discussion, but as Carson was saying, like using the group meetings to discuss, like what's working well, what's not working well, like if there's a new lab safety concern, like that would be a great thing to discuss in group meeting to get consensus from the group and to make sure everyone's on the same page about like how to best handle a particular issue. Did you want to say anything else about? this
Well, the other
one?
thing I just was thinking about, I mean, we sometimes also talk in lab meetings about what's going on in the world right now, especially with the
Mm,
funding, even though we also, and I actually appreciate it, some students have also said, you know what, it's very stressful for me. So I rather, so we, for example, we have a whole Slack group and we created a separate channel where we post like, forget what it's called, but current events basically, where we post things that are happening, like what the yeah all the things that the current administration is doing to kind of undermine basically science. And if people want to look on that, they can, but they don't have to. And I think I appreciated that because that's something I hadn't really thought about before. And so again, you can do some of these things also in the app group meeting. But I would say maybe ask first if people are with some of the topics if they're comfortable because it can be very stressful for people.
that's great. Yeah, because it's tough because a lot of the messaging I think I get from like students in class is like none of our faculty are saying anything about what's going on in the world. But then you might have, yeah, students who are really for like various reasons sensitive to kind of current events and what's happening. Like maybe if they have an identity that is
Mhm.
under attack or
Right.
so yeah, I think that's great to kind of have students opt out if they don't want to. Okay, building teamwork. Let me just read what we wrote for this task to remind myself what we put here.
I mean, I can. So I have maybe just while you for the
Yeah,
first
please.
point. So I had well the two projects that I mentioned that were unfortunately terminated. One of them was on drinking water disinfection byproducts, and we have some other project. And then in that area, the other one was on biosolids. So we actually have subgroups where we meet on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis with this group of students and postdocs that are specifically working on that. I mean, everybody is welcome, but typically it's the students that and yeah. And that's been very helpful because we brainstorm again new things, new directions. We also coordinate things. We also talk about who's on whose papers in terms of because yeah, I love. Just mentioned this earlier too. I love having students work on things together. It's just more fun, in my opinion, and for the students typically too. But you also want to, if you have students working together, especially PhD students, you really want to make sure early on that you know who's leading, for example, manuscripts and stuff. I've had, unfortunately, maybe we can talk about this afterwards. I've had some negative experiences with that where I didn't do this upfront, and then
Mm,
it led to a lot of tension. And I think it's preventable. So talk about these things early on, also with collaborators. I've had to put my foot down with one specific collaborator where I'm like, okay, I did so much work on this, and I insist. And also, I'm a junior faculty, so I still need the publications and stuff. And luckily, they came around, but it took a while, and it was very painful to have to do this because I came into this thinking like, as a junior faculty, I would get the right to, but again, that might not be the case. So just be upfront about these discussions, even though they might feel uncomfortable at the beginning. It's not like it's yeah, but it's important to do. Anyway.
thanks. Yeah, I think that was um what I was going to say as well, and I agree with everything you said. The for the second point, I think, and related to the subgroups, if there are similar research being done, then it would also be helpful to have your group members co-develop standard protocols for like the various experimentation or modeling that's done for that particular project. That way you start to build your institutional library of like, here's how we do these sets of experiments that are probably also cross-cutting for group members who are not particular to that subgroup. So it's always great to have those in like one centralized location documentation for students to rely on and to update over time as the group evolves. And yeah, I think we already talked about having team members contribute to grant writing, and yeah, like the the budget especially. It's yeah, it's I think some students, like I said, are very aware of where their money comes from, and as Karsten mentioned, some are not. Record keeping. Oh yeah, so do you want to? I was going to address the second point,
Yeah, I can
Karsten.
I can
Okay.
talk about, I mean, yeah, it is important to keep records of things. Your university it might actually require it. So we Hopkins has pretty strict requirements about we have to list exactly which chemical, we have to have an inventory of all the chemicals that we have in the lab, and that's for the reason of if there's an accident, an emergency. For example, the firefighters need to know what exactly is in the lab and things like this. And obviously, it's also important for you and for your students if someone looks for a chemical, where exactly it is. We have at this point I have 6 labs right now, which is and so I have chemicals in different places. I have fridges, freezers, shelves, and all these kind of things. So yeah, so knowing keeping track, and then also they have to be you have to do some upkeep. I know that's kind of a bit of a painful job to do, and it's not perfect what we're doing, but just in terms of, okay, if you used up a chemical, either reorder it or cancel it from the inventory so that you don't have anyone look for it for an hour or questioning where things are. And then because we are relying heavily on instrumentation, one thing that we are paying a lot of attention to or is this instrument maintenance log. Meaning, well, what if something had to do on the instrument, what did you, but also just like who ran the instrument, under what conditions and all these things, because it gives yeah, you can just log what has been done. You can keep track of how many injections, for example, in an instrument and all these kind of things. And when was the last, I don't know, cleaning done and things like this. So I think that's extremely important. And it's also really important if you have collaborators working on your instruments too, because you want to keep track of that too. Especially with sample numbers, because what can happen is that you say, well, yeah, if you have a few samples, go ahead and it's fine. I typically like to do that, but then suddenly you realize they analyzed, I don't know, 100 samples, and then obviously it becomes an issue because if you're the one paying for it. So yeah, I would say, I don't know if you have anything to add for them. Just,
Um, oh, like a yes to all of that. And also I was finding over the years that, like, say we order test tubes from vendor A, that somehow like we ended up with 4 different types of test tubes, all from different vendors. And I was like, why aren't we just buying the same one?
mm,
Like if this we know this works well, it's like compatible with the chemicals that we use. So we even do record keeping to that level of like this is the vendor catalog number
mm.
that we for like common consumables and lab supplies and like chemicals as well. Um and I want to add about the documentation also goes for your personnel as well. Recently, I've been having to do more of this than I would like. And so this is just keeping track of, like, for example, when you meet with your team members, I request that folks who meet with me prepare some sort of agenda just so that one, like they organize their thoughts so they don't come into your office and like shoot the breeze, which like love you, but like we're all busy and have things to do. And it's great to like use this time constructively if I'm giving you this time to discuss your research and give you advice and like counsel on what to do next. And so what I found again recently has been helpful is to have the agenda. And then I also have students like either take notes during the meeting of like what we're talking about. And then like I have an online record of that, or if you can have them like send meeting minutes afterwards as well. If
Mm.
and I hope this does not happen to any of you, but if for whatever reason you find yourself in a situation where you're like, I really need to start documenting what's happening for personnel issues, it's always great to have records as well. So just things to keep in mind. So like email, Slack messages, all that counts as well. Again, hopefully you don't need to do that, but it's a good resource to consider if you're not doing anything, any sort of written documentation at all, might want to consider that.
And well, so if I can just add one thing, and I've unfortunately actually not with one of my students, but I recently had to mediate a conversation between a PhD student and their advisor, where I was asked to be the mediator. If it really comes to the point that where there are considerable concerns, it is very helpful to actually write this down in an email, because otherwise, and it's again, there's the student might perceive it in a different way. And so the experience what I just described where I was the mediator was exactly that the faculty thought he's very clear in like, you're failing the way you're doing it. And the student did not perceive it like that at all. So having an email and also outlining, okay, within the next 6 months, these are the expectations. Because again, afterwards, if it comes to the point of like, for example, failing, you need to basically show that you will be
Mm-hmm.
asked, did the student not meet the expectations. And so if you clearly outline them, um, you yeah, you have basically the record of that. I personally don't do this for all of my students, and I wouldn't recommend necessarily doing it for all of the students because things are definitely fluctuating and it's not always linear. But I think if there are some concerns about a student, I would say start rather earlier than later with this.
Yes.
And again, it's for the benefit of both sides, right? So yeah.
Yeah, something again, like if you have an inkling that you might need to start doing that, like what Karsten was saying, what may be helpful is if you have a meeting with your student and you talk about, like here are some of the expectations or goals that you set for yourself, like at the beginning of the year, and like here's kind of where you are now, and I think you should, we need to consider your progress and blah blah blah. I think it's helpful then after the meeting concludes to follow up via email with that student so you have a written record of this is what we discussed in the meeting regarding your progress, follow up. So that again, if you need that documentation later, you have something in writing as opposed to like a meeting that you had in which there is no record afterward. They're like the HR side of managing a lab, like things we like don't really think about. I didn't at least when I started. I was like, I just want to do good science and like publish and get money and all these other things. Um, okay, I'm also looking at the time, so it's 10:45. Maybe
Mm.
we can try to like wrap up soon, Carson, so we have
Yeah,
time
yeah,
for questions.
I can maybe go through my slide
Oh,
briefly
okay, yeah.
and then we can go.
I think this was, do you want to talk about this orange loaf I'm
Um,
gonna pick?
yeah, I mean, I think so. I think this is both aligned. This is both related to new students coming in, but potentially also existing students if they have ideas. I think being clear about, okay, this is, and I always say if you want to reach out to our faculty, I encourage that. Um, Obviously, if you're like, I'm going, I don't know, shifting now suddenly to biology, to purely biology, I would be like, well, then that would probably mean you have to change your advisors. But I'm very open, and I've done this. I mean, we've done work on antimicrobial resistance, for example. That is certainly not at all my expertise, but we looped in a faculty that became a co-advisor. And so I think being just upfront about like this is outside my expertise, but I'm very open to having other faculty join for I mean for committees that's typically you do that anyway. But I think also just being clear about that there are some responsibility because they're your PhD students, both in terms of the financial side, but also like, yeah, that you obviously invest time and effort in that, that they can't just say, you know what, done with you, I'm going to switch over, that it's not that easy. Um, I think is important. I don't know. I think that's at least what comes to mind for this point for me. Yeah.
Okay. Okay, and then I want to put both of these
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. So, I mean, I just wanted to briefly bring this up because I think it is important and it's certainly something that has been a big thing for me. It's like if you have instrumentation, it's a great thing. So, I already mentioned most of our work is based on mass spectrometry. So we have two high resolution mass spectrometers and an LC-MS in my lab, which is great. The LC mass spec I was actually able to get as part of my startup package, and the GC high-res mass spec I inherited because unfortunately we had a faculty member who passed away shortly after the instrument was purchased. But so it's a great thing that you have instrumentation in your lab, and I wouldn't go. We need this. So our instruments are basically working, running 24/7. So it is very important that we have them. And it's also been really helpful in terms of collaboration. So I'm in between engineering and public health, and I actually just this morning got an email from someone in medicine who was interested in like chemicals that are coming out of certain things they use in the OR, and can we do research with them and look for like chemicals that are coming out of them. So it's been a really great way of collaborations. And again, also utilities right now because we do a lot of this non-target analysis work on PFAS. So there's a lot of interest, which has been really great. But I think there's also the other side that you really have to be mindful about is that these instruments cost a lot of money to maintain. And just to get you a sense of the free instruments I have right now, the service contracts are $140,000 a year just for service contracts that I'm paying. In theory, luckily for the instrument I inherited, the department so far has agreed to do a reduced service contract. But for the other one, so yeah, it's $90,000 right now per year that I'm investing in my instrument. So I mean, that's basically a postdoc position that I have, right? So keep that in mind. Again, for me, because we focus on analytical chemistry, and our instruments we are the primary user, it's been very important, and that's why we could have been able to do a lot of the work that we are doing. But there is this aspect of like the maintenance, and I think the last point, and that's actually something that I'm kind of like thinking more and more about, that kind of like gives me a bit of some stomach ache, is the aspect of instruments having a certain lifetime. And that means either they are degrading at one point, or the technology is outdated, or what's even more important with a lot of instrumentation is the service contract runs actually out. So the companies are actually not even willing to provide service for these instruments anymore, or there might not be parts available. And so, yeah, that's an important part. And I guess the middle bullet is this: every year I have this question, okay, should we just not do the service contract and just, if something happens, it happens? And I know people who run their instruments that way. Yeah, it's just challenging because again, if an instrument fails, it's not just the parts, it's like the people coming out. I mean, just because someone coming out is easily $4,000 or $5,000 without them actually having done anything on the instrument. And then you add the parts on top. So yeah. So anyway, so I just wanted to bring this up, and I think maybe even having discussions in your department about, and I've certainly had those with like, how can we make this more sustainable? Maybe having a core facility and things like this, or integrating it into a core facility, sharing service contracts. So I'm right now talking with our chemistry department, who also have these instruments from the same vendor, to kind of like have combined service contracts. Yeah, so these are the things that I just, again, to keep in mind. Instrumentation is great, but it comes at a cost.
Okay, so I think we have one more slide here, and maybe what I'll suggest is I'll just keep this up because a lot of this we talked about already, and if that's all right with you, Carsten.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Oh,
Okay,
that's perfect.
I'm gonna stop recording. Stop recording.